So what's the difference between good enough and it's as good as, right? Good enough is just that. It's good enough. Just as good as is a high dose of coke. Most of the time. Every now and again, just as good as is literally it's just as good as that. But I digress. Think of the number of times you hear dudes or dudettes named Bernadette go, I got XYZ because it's just as good as blah, 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 blah. Dude, it's okay. We get it. Everyone's broke. It's fine. You got it because it was good enough. Doesn't mean it's as good as. Doesn't mean it's the best one for the job. But it's good enough to get the job done. You know, sometimes we go to Harbor Freight and buy some crap at Harbor Freight. Not because it's just as good as like Snap-on or whatever, but because it's good enough to get the job done. And literally no one cares that the jacks are the same. That's not my point. My point is, it's okay if your shit's not as good as. Sometimes your shit just needs to be good enough. Are we talking about guns? Sure. Are we talking about cars? Sure. Are we talking about yourself? There you go. So, I'm doing this thing and it's just as good as friggin', you know, I'm eating this certain diet. It's just as good as working out. Is it? Is it? Really? Really? All right, well, if that's the case, well, about 2 weeks into whatever, you know, cockamamie diet you're on, that's just as good as working out, just drop something and run 100 yards. Just say, yeah, screw it, I'm gonna run 100 yards out of nowhere with like, just as soon as the thing pops in your brain of like, hey, I need to just Forrest Gump it. And that'll be proof that there is a difference between like just as good as and good enough. Eating a little bit better and a little bit differently, good enough for the time being. I ain't got time to work out, you know, or I can't find time to work out. You know, I don't know what I'm doing. Cool, that's cool. But it, you know, doing whatever doesn't replace that. So, like, you're, like saying you're having to like cheat like a wrench or something with another wrench. You're doing the thing where you put the box in on the open end and you did leveraging thing and going, oh, it's just as good as a breaker bar. It's good enough because I don't have a breaker bar. It's not just as good as a breaker bar. So it's a two-way speed bump, right? It's like one of those old school like Blady, like you're not gonna go into this parking lot the wrong way. It's like that, but two ways, and depending on how you hit it as to whether or not, you know, you're fucked. So don't let good enough be so don't think good enough is just as good as. There we go. Found how I wanted to get to that point. So yeah, don't think good enough is just as good as, because it's not. It's good enough. That also being said, just because it's good enough for a time being doesn't mean it's always good enough. Sometimes you gotta step that shit up when you have the ability, you have the time, you have the wherewithal, or whatever you want to say. But good enough is just temporary, right? It's like when you're stuck out in the middle of nowhere. You know, fucking tarp's good enough. But do you want to live in a tarp the entirety of your days until you draw your last breath at the oldest age possible? No, you don't. No, it's not good enough for life, for the entirety of life. It's just good enough for the situation. So, you know, not being a dick or nothing, just trying to be frank.